On the evening of July 22, 1995, what should have been a typical Saturday night for the Paler family became the beginning of their worst nightmare. Elise was at home watching television with her family when she received a call from Jacob, Joseph, and Royce. They told her they had marijuana and invited her to join them. Like many teenagers, Elise made the decision to sneak out, telling her parents she was going to bed while actually leaving to meet her friends. The group went to a eucalyptus grove on the Nipomo Mesa. While Elise relaxed and enjoyed what she thought was a casual evening with friends, the three young men were preparing to execute their plan. What happened next was a brutal attack that resulted in Elise's death. The details are disturbing and difficult to discuss, but it's important to understand the severity of what occurred. According to court records and confessions, Jacob used his belt to strangle Elise while Royce held her down. Joseph then used a hunting knife to stab her repeatedly. All three participated in the attack as Elise fought back and pleaded for her life, calling out to God and for her mother. The medical examiner later determined that Elise suffered at least 12 stab wounds, though none individually were fatal. She died from excessive blood loss. What makes this case even more disturbing is that the violence didn't end with Elise's death. The perpetrators committed additional acts of violence against her body that I won't detail here, but which demonstrate the complete moral breakdown of these individuals. After leaving Elise's body in the eucalyptus grove, they would return multiple times over the following months, with at least one of them bragging about these visits to friends. The savagery of this crime shocked experienced law enforcement officers and the community. It represented not just the loss of a young life, but a complete abandonment of human decency by three individuals who should have been Elise's peers and protectors. When Elise failed to return home that night, her family immediately knew something was wrong. This wasn't typical behavior for their daughter, who, despite her decision to sneak out that evening, was generally responsible and communicative with her parents. David and Liz Ann Paler, along with extended family and friends, launched an intensive search effort. They contacted police, distributed flyers, and desperately sought any information about their daughter's whereabouts. For 8 agonizing months, the Paler family lived in limbo. Elise's name was added to Arroyo Grande's growing list of missing persons cases, but there were no leads, no witnesses, and no evidence of what had happened to her. Then, in March of 1996, something remarkable happened that would break the case wide open. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, one of the perpetrators himself. Royce Casey, one of the 3 individuals who had participated in Elise's murder, experienced what can only be described as a crisis of conscience. In what investigators later called a miraculous change of heart, Royce converted to Christianity. His newfound religious beliefs created an unbearable psychological burden. The weight of his guilt, combined with his new understanding of the moral implications of his actions, compelled him to confess to his preacher about his participation in Elise's death. But Royce's decision to come forward wasn't motivated solely by guilt. He was also afraid for his own safety. Joseph and Jacob had begun discussing plans for additional murders, telling Royce that Elise wouldn't be the only one, there would be others. Since Royce had distanced himself from his former friends after his religious conversion, he feared he might become their next target. He was particularly troubled by a line from a Slayer song that goes, "If you're not with us, you may no longer exist." In March 1996, Royce made the decision that would finally bring justice for Elise. He contacted authorities and agreed to lead them to the location where they had left her body. Investigators followed Royce to the eucalyptus grove on the Nipomo Mesa, where they discovered Elise's badly decomposed remains. After 8 months of uncertainty, the Paler family finally had answers, though not the answers they had hoped for. Once Elise's body was discovered, the investigation moved quickly. Royce's confession provided investigators with detailed information about the crime, the other perpetrators, and their motivations. The forensic examination, conducted by a qualified pathologist, confirmed the brutal nature of the attack. The evidence supported Royce's account of what had occurred that July evening. Jacob DeLachemot and Joseph Fiorella were arrested shortly after the discovery of Elise's body. During questioning, both admitted to their involvement in the crime and confirmed their fascination with Satanism and the occult. All three perpetrators acknowledged that their actions had been heavily influenced by the music of Slayer, particularly songs like Altar of Sacrifice, Dead Skin Mask, and Postmortem. They described how these songs had provided both inspiration and instruction for their crime. The investigation also revealed disturbing details about the perpetrators' ongoing obsession with their crime. Joseph's own mother told investigators that her son had admitted to her that he and his friends had committed additional acts of violence against Elise's body after her death. Friends of the perpetrators testified that at least one of them had bragged about returning to the crime scene multiple times over the months following the murder. What emerged from the investigation was a picture of three young men who had become completely disconnected from normal human morality. Their obsession with Satanism, combined with their interpretation of extreme music lyrics, had created a mindset where murder seemed not only acceptable but desirable. The case raised difficult questions about the influence of music and media on vulnerable individuals. While millions of people listen to heavy metal music without committing violent acts, these particular individuals, at this particular time in their lives, had used these influences to justify unspeakable actions. All three perpetrators, Joseph Fiorella, Jacob DeLachemot, and Royce Casey, ultimately pleaded no contest to the murder of Elise Paler. They were each sentenced to serve 25 years to life in prison. The Paler family, devastated by the loss of their daughter, sought to hold others accountable for what they saw as influences that had contributed to her death. In 1996, they filed a lawsuit against the band Slayer, claiming that songs like Postmortem and Dead Skin Mask had provided detailed instructions for the crimes committed against Elise. However, in 2001, Judge Jeffrey Burke dismissed the case, ruling that while Slayer's lyrics were repulsive and profane, they did not direct or instruct listeners to commit the acts that resulted in the vicious torture murder of Elise Paler. A second lawsuit, arguing that the band had knowingly distributed harmful material to minors, was also dismissed. The judge ruled that the music wasn't harmful to children as alleged and was protected by the First Amendment. Years later, Jacob would recant some of his earlier statements about the influence of Slayer's music, instead placing primary blame on Joseph Fiorella. He stated, "Slayer's music was destructive, but it wasn't why Elise was murdered. She was murdered because Joe Fiorella was obsessed with her and obsessed with killing her." Today, all three perpetrators remain incarcerated in separate California prison facilities. Royce Casey, who was instrumental in solving the case, was denied parole at his first hearing in 2016. Joseph Fiorella became eligible for parole in 2020, while Jacob's parole information has not been publicly disclosed. If eventually granted parole, the three men will be released when they're in their early 40s, still young enough to potentially rebuild their lives. But for the Paler family, there can be no such fresh start. As Elise's mother, Liz Ann Paler, put it, "Something is wrenched from you, a piece of your heart. That's what it feels like. The pain is so great, it's as great as any physical pain, anything you can imagine." The case of Elise Paler serves as a tragic reminder of how vulnerable young people can be to negative influences, and how the combination of substance abuse, occult obsessions, and misinterpreted media can create deadly consequences. Most importantly, it reminds us to remember Elise not as a victim, but as a beloved daughter, sister, and friend whose life had value and meaning beyond the terrible way it ended.